Hi friends, no doubt you heard in the news that the IRS is currently saying they will not take action against houses of worship that are endorsing political candidates from their pulpit. They're saying that in these cases, these are really conversations amongst friends and family, and therefore not, shall we say, vulnerable to action. I've been really wrestling with this whole situation in the week or so that this has been out there in the news. And I'm not going to talk about the legal issues behind this because there are canon lawyers in the Episcopal Church and parallels across all kinds of religious organizations who are digging into the legality of this issue. That is their specialty, not mine. But I am deeply troubled by this. And I need to say a little bit about my bona fides on this. I have been struggling with this issue for 30 years. There have been times when I felt as a preacher that my First Amendment rights were being circumscribed by IRS regulations around whether or not we could really speak freely from the pulpit. There was even a time when I served in Maine, and my parishioners from Maine may remember this, when I put a political campaign sign in front of my house, which happened to be the rectory, but it was my house. It wasn't in front of the church. And this caused all kinds of consternation. I was young. I didn't really anticipate the consternation because I kept thinking this was my house. My dear bishop even gently and lovingly called me on the carpet for it back in the day. And said, you really can't put a political sign in front of your house. I will say that after the initial pushback, I turned the plastic sleeve inside out and wrote, Jesus said, love your neighbor, and put that in front of my house instead. So all that is to say, I come at this question as someone who has really wrestled with this and who has felt the impact of not being able to say everything I think from the pulpit. I've come to a place, and people who hear me preach will probably recognize this, where I'm unlikely to be overtly political in the pulpit. I'm more likely to encourage us to have conversations that can happen during a forum where there's back and forth dialogue, because the pulpit is kind of a one-way communication. We Episcopalians aren't big on standing up in church and pushing back against a preacher. And it feels like a really unfortunate misuse of power to use the pulpit in a way where people who might disagree with us in that way can't really push back. So in the past several years, I've really chosen to keep it on Jesus. And if Jesus is bumping up against things that seem political, I'm keeping it on the gospel and letting people discern their own way forward. Richard Bruxford Culligan, who some may know as the psalmist in the field, said politics is just how we have relationships on a big scale. That's all politics is. The question that's being raised by this IRS decision isn't necessarily about politics so much as it is about partisanship. So that's a bit of a departure. And here's why I think it's really dangerous. I'm going to use the example of the PPP loans to tell a story. During the pandemic, we were given the opportunity to apply for PPP loans. They were loans meant to help us sustain our staff and our businesses across the economy during the pandemic. And we at St. Peter's used it to keep our employees employed, including in our thrift shop, where we had a thrift shop that was closed. The thrift shop was bringing in no money during that time, and we kept paying our staff. And the PPP loans allowed us to do that, which was wonderful. But boy, that first year when the PPP loans weren't there anymore was really painful. You know, after the pandemic, when we were all coming back in person, we thought everything would bounce back and giving would be what it was. And we were wrong. Like, not just in churches, we were wrong going to our favorite restaurant, right? And our favorite little recipe was no longer on their menu. Across our world, across our economy, things had changed. And churches often found themselves really struggling when the PPP loan had kept things artificially calm in our parish economies. And when they were gone and that money wasn't there, it had a real impact on our ability to do our ministry. And that's what concerns me about this current conversation. If a church becomes dependent on its advocating for a particular candidate, maybe even receiving money from political action committees, super PACs, shall we say, in exchange for an endorsement. What happens when a church realizes they can't endorse that candidate anymore? The candidate makes a decision or crosses a line, or that administration does something that is very much against what this church stands for, and they realize that this is not the bargain they thought they had. And suddenly, if that money gets taken away, what happens to the ministry? It could be problematic internally as well. It's challenging already to be a preacher in these times, as you could imagine. It's a privilege and amazing to be a preacher in these times. But can you imagine, preacher friends, what the lobbying might be like if our parishioners suddenly thought they should lobby us to endorse candidates from the pulpit? And what happens if we don't endorse their candidate? We had a candidate in our congregation last fall who ran for Congress, and I prayed for her and I gave thanks for her in announcements, thanked her for standing up and choosing to put herself out there and taking the really bold step of saying, I will help fix things. I didn't endorse her, but I gave thanks for her. And that felt like a holy thing to do. And I'm grateful for her, still am, for the courage it took to make that leap and step out in that way. But that's really different from endorsing a particular candidate in an election. We need to preach Jesus. We need to preach Jesus. And anything that keeps us from preaching Jesus, including a political endorsement, it's an obstruction that God does not need us to have. Our work is challenging enough. It's beautiful. It's exciting. It's really hard, but it's also full of grace. And endorsing a political candidate, far too complicated, and it makes us really vulnerable. And ultimately, it feels to me really dangerous. Like this is something of a trap that's being set that will actually take away autonomy from houses of worship. Right now, we're in a position where we can speak out and proclaim the gospel, even if it bumps up against the policies of a particular political party or a particular politician. We're preaching the good news. To take that away and to tie us to one political party or one politician over another seems to me it would greatly limit our ability to truly proclaim the good news God is calling us to proclaim. Like I said, I'll let the lawyers wrestle with the legal aspects of this. But I think our churches are better when we are free to follow the Spirit, to preach Jesus, to preach the good news. Our brothers and sisters in other faiths are stronger when they can preach the love that they've been given to preach, and to take this invitation. Well, it feels a lot more like a trap than a gift, a bit like a Trojan horse. So that's my thought today on why this is a really, really bad idea. It may be that this decision only applies to 2 houses of worship in a particular legal case right now. It's not clear that this would be a sweeping proclamation or that it's even going to stand legally. But those are my thoughts. Stay well, love each other, and take care. God bless you.